Hello, welcome back to my asynchronous class. My name is Satwika, and in this video, we'll be learning about evolution, development, and plasticity. So in the last meeting, we have discussed about the introduction to genetics with Dr. Hamim. And more importantly, from that lecture, we know that genes may influence behavior, right? And that is a complex issue. And that from that genetic lectures, we know that nearly human behavior has some heritability, right? So in this video, we will continue the discussion of the evolution of behavior and some of them based on genetics. And further, we will also discuss about the development and the plasticity of our brain. This is our overview of this chapter. This video will be reviewing some of these topics, and we will begin with the evolution of behavior and continue to learn about the development of our brain and brain plasticity. So let's start with evolution first. What is evolution? You might recognize right away one founder of evolution. He is Charles Darwin, right? And he actually didn't like the term evolution, but he preferred the term of descent with modification, emphasizing on the idea of changes without necessarily implying improvement of explaining what is evolution actually. So what is evolution? So evolution is a change over generation in the frequency of various genes in a population, all right? So we distinguish two questions about evolution. The first one is, how did some species evolve and how do species evolve? To ask how a species did evolve is to ask what evolved from what, okay? For example, because humans are more similar to chimpanzees than to other species, so then biologists infer a common ancestor of humans. So, and fossils also help to illuminate changes over time, right? And new evidence become available, and then biologists also sometimes change their opinions about the evolutionary relationship between one species and another. In contrast, the question of how species do evolve is a question of how the process works, okay? How the evolution works, and the process is a necessary outcome from what we know about reproduction. And the reasoning goes as follows. So the first one, because of genetic influences, offspring generally resemble their parents, right? And the second one, evolution happens through mutation, recombination, and microduplication of genes introduce new heritable variation that help or harm an individual's chance to surviving and reproducing. And the third one, certain individuals reproduce more than others do, right? Those passing on their genes to the next generation. Any gene that is associated with greater reproductive success will become more prevalent in later generation. Therefore, the current generation of any species resembles the individuals who reproduced in the past. If a change in environment causes a different gene to increase the probability of survival and reproduction, then that gene will spread in the population. All right, let's just clarify the principle of evolution by addressing a few misconceptions about evolution. The first one, does the use or disuse of some structure or behavior cause an evolutionary increase or decrease in that feature? You may have heard people say something like, because we hardly ever use our little toes, they get smaller and smaller and smaller in each succeeding generation. This idea is a carryover of biologist Lamarck's, the Lamarck's theory of evolution through the inheritance of acquired characteristics. And it's called as a Lamarck's evolution, right? So according to this idea, if you exercise your arm muscles, then your children will be born with bigger arm muscles. And if you fail to use your little toes, your children's little toes will be smaller than yours. But the question is that correct? And then biologists have found that is no mechanism for Lamarckian evolution to occur and no evidence that it does. Okay, so the theory is failed. So using or failing to use some body structure does not change the genes actually. People's little toes will shrink in future only if people with genes for smaller little toes manage to reproduce more than other people do. That's how evolution works. And because of modern medicine can keep almost anyone alive nowadays, yeah, and because welfare programs in prosperous countries provide the necessity of life for almost everyone, some people assert that humans are no longer subject for the principle of survival of the fittest. And therefore, the argument goes that human evolution has slowed or stopped because of that. But the flaw in this argument is that evolution depends on reproduction, not just survival. If people with certain genes have more than the average number of children, their gene will spread in the population. And then, does evolution mean improvement? Well, it actually depends on what you mean by improvement, right? So by definition, evolution improves fitness, which is operationally defined as the number of copies of one gene that endure in later generation. So if you have more children than average and they survive long enough to reproduce, you are evolutionary fit, right? Regardless of whether you are successful in any other way. You also increase your fitness by supporting your relatives who share many of your genes and spread them by their own reproduction. So any genes that spread is by definition fit. But however, genes that increase fitness at one time and place might be disadvantageous, right? After a change in the environment. For example, the colorful tail feathers of the male peacock enable them to attract females, but might become disadvantageous in the presence of new predators that respond to bright colors, for example. In other words, the genes of the current generation evolved because they were fit for a previous generation, right? And they may or may not be adaptive in the future. And the second one, does evolution benefit in the individual or the species? The answer is neither, actually, right? It benefits the gene. So according to Dawkins in 1989, he suggests that you don't use your genes to reproduce yourself. Rather, your genes use you to reproduce themselves, right? It is very interesting. So imagine a gene that causes you to risk your life to protect your children. If that gene enables you to leave behind more surviving children than you would have otherwise, then that gene will increase the prevalence within your population. All right. And from the perspective of behavior, here evolutionary psychology is a science that concerns how behavior then evolves based on the evolution also. This emphasis is on evolutionary and functional explanation, right? That is how our genes reflect those of our ancestor and why natural selection might have favored the genes that promote certain behavior. So the assumption is that any behavior characteristic or of a species arose through natural selection and presumably provided some advantage, at least in ancestor times, right? So to understand this, consider this example. So some animal species have better color vision than others, right? And some have better peripheral vision. So species here evolve the kind of vision they need for their way of life. So, and several human behaviors make no sense except in terms of evolution. For example, people get goosebumps, yeah, the erection of the hair, especially on their arms and shoulders when they are cold or frightened. Some of you might still experience this goosebump. So goosebumps here produce little, if any, benefit to human because our shoulder and our arm hairs are short, actually, nowadays, and usually covered by clothing. So we produce clothing that save us from cold. But in most other mammals, however, erected hairs make a frightened animal look larger and more intimidating for their predators. And they also provide extra insulation when the air is cold. So we explain human goosebump by saying that the behavior evolved in our removed ancestors, and we still inherited that mechanism. So also consider the infant grasp reflex. You can see that figure. So an infant will grasp tightly onto a finger, pencil, or similar object placed in their palms of the hand early in their life, yeah? And what actually good does this to accomplish this? Actually, it's little or none advantage for humans, but for our monkey-like ancestor, it was very critical for them to have a grasp reflex. So a mother monkey often needs all four their limbs to climb a tree for food or to run away from a predator. And an infant monkey that couldn't hold on will jeopardize its life. So they use this grasp reflex to hold on their mothers, that is like hanging or climbing the trees. And to further illustrate evolutionary psychology, consider the theoretically interesting example of altruistic behavior, or an action that benefits someone else other than ourselves, right? So a gene that encourages altruistic behavior will help other individuals survive and spread their genes. That is a possible cause to the altruistic individual. So the question is, could a gene for altruism spread? And if so, and then how? How common is altruism? It certainly occurs in human, right? That we help other people, for example, like charities, helping people in distress, and etc. And then among non-humans or the animals, altruism is actually less common. Cooperation, actually, it certainly occurs in animals, right? For example, a pack of animals may hunt together or forage together, yeah? But real altruism in the sense of helping a non-relative without quickly getting something in return is usually unusual for non-humans or for animals. So even when animals do appear altruistic, they often have a selfish motive. So when a crow finds food or on the ground, for example, it calls loudly, right, attracting other crows that will share the food. Is that altruism? Actually, not really. A bird on the ground is vulnerable to attack by cats and other enemies. So having other crows around means they have more eyes to watch for dangers. Also consider meerkats in this picture. It's kind of mongoose, right? And it's periodically one or another member of a meerkat colony stands. And if they see like dangers, they will emit an alarm call that warns the other meerkats. So the alarm calls help the other, including their relatives. But the one who sees the dangers first and emit the alarm calls is the one most likely to escape. So for the sake of that illustration, let's suppose without evidence, right, that some gene increases altruistic behavior. But could it spread within a population? So one common reply is that most altruistic behavior costs very little. It's true, but costing little is not good enough, right? So a gene spread only if the individuals with it will reproduce more than those without it. So another common reply is that the altruistic behavior benefits the species. This is true again, but the rebuttal is the same, sorry. So a gene that benefits the species but fails to help the individuals dies out with that individual. And a better explanation for this altruistic behavior is the kin selection. So it's a selection for a gene that benefits the individual's relative. So a gene can spread if it causes you to take great efforts, even risking your life, to protect your children, because they share many of your genes, including perhaps a gene for protecting their own children later. So natural selection can also favor altruism toward other relatives, such as brother, sister, cousin, nephews, and so on. In both humans and non-humans, helpful behavior is more common toward relative, right, than toward unrelated individuals. And the next, another explanation is actually reciprocal altruism is the idea that individual help those who will return the favor. So researchers find that people are prone to help not only those who help them, but also people whom they observe helping someone else, right? So even young children show this tendency. The idea is not just you scratch my back, so I'll scratch yours, but also you scratch someone else's back, so I'll scratch yours. So by helping others, you build a reputation for helpfulness, right? And others will willing to cooperate with you based on their observation. So this system works only if individuals recognize one another. Otherwise, an uncooperative individual can accept favor, prosper, and never repay the favors. Okay, so in other words, reciprocal altruism requires an ability to identify individuals and remember them later. Humans, of course, are excellent at recognizing one another even over long delay. And the third hypothesis is the group selection. According to this idea, altruistic group will thrive better than the less cooperative ones. So although this idea is certainly true, it faces a problem. So even if cooperative groups do well, wouldn't an uncooperative individual within the cooperative group gain an advantage? Nevertheless, the theorists have concluded that group selection does work under certain circumstances, such as when cooperative individuals do most of their interaction with one another. So group selection works especially well for humans because of our ability to punish or expel uncooperative people. Okay, so that's like the explanation of how altruistic behavior inherited. So, and that's all for this video. I'll see you shortly in the next video that we will discuss about the brain development. See you soon.